Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and in this painting tutorial video I'm going to show you how to paint this winter gnome. This is done on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. I'm using a canvas panel. I used quite a few brushes for this painting. I used this Mop Brush. This is actually an e.l.f. brand makeup brush. I've been using this a lot lately to do blended backgrounds, so it's a pretty cool brush. It's only about $4 or $5 at Target. And I used a 10-0 spotter brush. That's the Simply Simmons brush, and I'm going to use this pack of brushes here. This is the Velvet Touch Princeton brushes. I have all these brushes listed in the description and on the website. It's important to know that it's okay if you don't have these exact brushes. I am all about improvising and using whatever materials you have on hand. You could even do the blending thing with a sponge. So I'm going to start out with Cobalt Blue and Titanium White on my palette. I'm going to wet this brush and pat it dry. I have a big old towel with me because this brush soaks up a lot of water. So it needs to be wet but not dripping wet, so pat it dry. I'm going to start with Cobalt and I'm going to mix a little bit of white into it. So we're doing this blending background thing. And it's going to start out at the top with a darker blue, and it's going to blend to a lighter blue as I work my way down. So I'm going to create this sort of swirl style effect with my brush. So I'm painting in circles, and I'm basically going to work my way to the bottom of the canvas, gradually adding a little more white so that the blue gets lighter and lighter as I work my way down. I mentioned about 20 seconds ago that you can use a sponge for this blending thing. So if you have an artist sponge with you, one of those round sponges, you can do the same technique. So you just take the sponge and dip it in the color, and you do the circular thing, and it'll create a similar technique. The blending brush really helps to soften the strokes. It makes them look very soft and blended. I also have done this with a flat brush. So if you just have the 3/4 flat brush, you can do the same kind of background, kind of do it in circles, or you can do X strokes. You can do cross the strokes so that they blend together. So there's more than one way to do this. I just decided to do it with the makeup brush to create a soft look in the background. And so you can change the direction of the strokes. So you don't have to go circular all the way down. You can kind of go angular, go different ways. But we're just going to have fun with this background and not think too hard about it. Gradually adding more white as I work my way down, and then you can add more of the Cobalt Blue if needed. If it's getting too light, just grab a little bit more blue and blend it back up. And it doesn't have to be perfect because the sky is the background and the focus is really going to be the gnome when we start painting the gnome in. So you can just kind of go have fun and go crazy and not stress too hard about this background. I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt over here at the top and just kind of blend it down. So if you like the swirly look, you can keep all the swirled strokes, or if you want more of a smooth look, you could smooth your strokes out some more. So it kind of just depends on the look you're going for. I am going to speed this video up just slightly here. And basically you're just doing the same technique, adding the blue and the white. Make sure your bottom is slightly lighter, and you can go all the way to the bottom of the canvas, so you don't have to leave a gap at the bottom or anything like that. Okay, so you want to go ahead and rinse that brush off and set it to the side. You need to wait for this canvas to dry before going on to the next step. So I'm going to show you how to draw the gnome onto the canvas. I also have a traceable. If you love using my traceables, that's absolutely okay. But I've been getting a lot of requests for how to draw these things. So I'm going to show you how to draw the gnome. So I'm going to start with the nose of the gnome. The nose is pretty much right in the center of the canvas. So it's an oval shape nose that is about 2 fingers high, maybe 3 fingers wide of a nose. So maybe 2 inches wide. Anyway, so then we're going to draw his hat. So his hat kind of overlaps the nose, so it kind of hugs that shape. That's the bottom part of his hat. So there's the base of his hat, and it kind of dips up, and then it dips down on the left and the right, and then the actual hat, so it's kind of wavy line on both sides. You want to utilize all that canvas, so you want to go all the way to the top there. And then you can decide which side it's going to dip down. So my fall gnome dipped down the other side. I'm going to have this one dip down towards the right. And so you'll just have it dip down and go to a point. So yeah, I'm using just a regular drawing pencil for this. It's okay to use that on canvas. I'm going to draw the beard next. So the beard starts on the left and the right, just under the hat, and then it kind of gets narrow towards the bottom. So I'm doing the edging of the beard, so the texture kind of on the edge, sort of these loose zigzag lines, and it curves down and goes to a point towards the bottom. And then we have his shoes that are just under the beard. So I estimated about 1 finger from the bottom edge of the canvas. And there's a finger space between the shoes, so they're not both touching. They're kind of slightly spaced apart. And then we have the bottom of the robe, which the line kind of hugs the shape of his shoes. So it looks like it's kind of draping over the shoes. And then I did the kind of the edging at the bottom, and then it goes up diagonally and then to the beard. And then the edging on the bottom here is kind of curved on the sides. And then I went in and kind of estimated where his hand would be. Wanted to make this beard slightly thinner here on the right side. Then go ahead and draw his sleeve. So this one is pointing downwards. And then we have the edging on his sleeve, and I'll be doing his mitten too. Just kind of erasing these extra lines that I was editing. And then make sure that the other hand is kind of lined up. So I did this, I drew the sleeve first, but then realized, okay, so I want him to be holding a lantern. I'm doing the mitten over here on the right. So there's his mitten. Kind of touching up the beard here. And then realized that there's not going to be a lot of space for that lantern. So I erased that sleeve, and I'm going to do it kind of at a different angle here so that I'll have more room for that lantern. So it's going to be kind of at a higher angle. So if you're watching this and drawing along, I would highly recommend that you actually draw the lantern first, and then you can draw his sleeve and hand to go and meet that lantern so it looks like he's holding it. But I will be demonstrating how I drew the lantern here in just a bit. Just touching up the robe here and the edging. And so we have the handle of the lantern. So it's got kind of this hook sort of curved shape. And then I want to make sure my mitten is definitely hold the lantern. So you see what I'm talking about? I recommend that you go ahead and draw the lantern first, and then go ahead and draw the glove so it's holding the handle, and then you can make your sleeve. See, I found that out the hard way, but that's what drawing's about. It's sketching and drawing lightly and kind of redoing your shape until you kind of like what you want. You don't always necessarily have to have the first line correct the first time around. So with this lantern here, we have the handle part, but then there's a small circle and another sort of smallish circle underneath that small circle. And then there is kind of more of an oval shape underneath, so that's the top of the lantern. And we want two lines that kind of curved on both sides, so to create the lantern shape, so the glass part. That little circle in the middle, that's the light. And then we have these two curved lines that kind of go in an X over that light shape. And then we have the two sort of metal parts that are on the left and the right side of the lantern. And then we have the base. So the base is circular, a little bit flat on the bottom, a little bit curved on the bottom. You can make it more flat on the bottom if you want. And then if you wanted to do like a different style lantern, you can definitely do a different style lantern. It's kind of fun. You can look up clip art for a lantern, and there's all sorts of fun different styles. And then of course we have the snowy ground that he is standing on. And so I'm just going to go and touch up my lines and erase the not so necessary ones. I found there's a lot of pencil drawing in this, but it didn't really interrupt with the way the paint was applied to the canvas. It didn't make it look gray or weird or anything like that. So the paint goes over the pencil nicely. You just want to make sure if you have a lot of erase marks that you really get rid of all those erase marks. And so I actually like to get a big paintbrush to help sweep off all my erase marks if I'm doing a lot of drawing on a canvas. And this guy actually has an ornament also hanging from his hat. So I'm going to do the little hook and then the top piece of the ornament and then a circle. And then I'm not going to draw the pine needle branches. That is in the traceable, so if you wanted to use that. And I did mention, yes, there is a traceable. Kind of a little bit of an advanced drawing if you're not so confident in your drawing skills. There's nothing wrong with that. You can always draw it on your own and make it your own style. Or if you just don't feel comfortable drawing, then grab the traceable, get a piece of transfer graphite paper, lay it underneath the traceable, and simply just transfer it right onto the canvas. So we're going to move along to the actual painting part of this tutorial, and I am going to load my palette with Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, Cadmium Red Medium, and I'm going to be using my number 8 round brush. So I'll be using this green and red to make a light green color. You'll also need to freshen titanium white if you don't have that on your palette already. So I'm going to make this light green color, and I'm going to grab about equal amounts of the green and white, maybe a little bit more white than the green. Then I'm going to grab a teeny amount of red in there, and it's going to make that green look a little bit warmer. You don't have to do the red thing if you don't feel comfortable mixing red with the green, but I like to do it because it makes the green look, like I said, warmer and kind of more of a sort of a sap looking green, kind of a Christmassy green. And so just the bottom part of this hat is painted with that light greenish white red color. And so just a solid coat of that color filling in that shape. That's all I did was fill in the shape. And then the hat is, I didn't even rinse my brush for this, and that's okay. So there might be some of that light green left on my brush, and that's okay. But I'm going to make this dark hunter green looking color with that Hooker's Green Hue Permanent and a little bit of that Cadmium Red Hue Medium. So green and red. Just a little bit of red. You don't need a lot of red because then your color will turn more brown than anything. So just a teeny tiny bit of red. It creates that sort of deep green color in his hat. So then you're just going to paint the entire hat with that color. If you like having like color variation, so you see how I super fast mix a darker green on my palette, and maybe there is a little bit of lighter green to start with, and that's okay. It just kind of mixes together. It's okay if your color doesn't stay consistent throughout. If it blends naturally, that's okay. Your hat goes to a point, so when it does go to a point, it will be helpful if just dip your brush in a little bit of water and use the tip of your brush to, because it's a round brush, you have a point on your brush so that you can go to that thinner point of the hat, and the water helps the paint to flow a little bit better for that point. So see how I twisted that paint on my brush? It kind of gets that paint to be distributed towards the tip of the brush, and then I was able to go ahead and do the hat I started from the point and then I worked my way towards the hat, and I'm just filling in the rest. And it's okay if your strokes are kind of going in different directions of the hat. I kind of tried to make mine kind of go with the flow of the hat, so in the middle maybe they're a little bit more curved, and then on the side they kind of go with the line of the hat, but it really doesn't matter. And then his mittens are that same hunter green color. I'm still using the number 8 brush for his mittens. If you need to switch to the smaller brush for that, you can do that. So if you wanted to use that number 4 brush, or even if you have a smaller brush than that. But this number 8 has a really nice point to it, so I'm able to get smaller areas with the brush without having to switch to a smaller one. But right now I am going to switch to a number 4 round brush, and so I'll be doing his nose next. The color I used for his nose is called Unbleached Titanium, and so add it in the water, dry it, and then paint the shape of his nose with that color. And it's okay if that color overlaps the green a little bit. We can always go back and have his hat kind of overlap his nose again, depending on how we want it to look. With this, I had the strokes go in a circle. We're going to do the beard next, and for the beard, I used titanium white and the color Mars Black. So go ahead and rinse that brush off. Load your palette in some Mars Black. We only need a teeny tiny bit of that Mars Black. And if you need to freshen your white, you can. I probably should have freshened mine here because I got a hint of green in there. So his beard is actually going to have a tiny bit of green in there. That's okay. And so I'm going to just paint the base layer of his beard with the white. So we're not doing any black yet. We're just painting the base of it with the white. And so I'm going to use my round brush. I'm going to make sure my white is nice and bright here because I don't know if I'm going to like that tiny bit of green inside of his white. So I added some more white right there on my palette. I'm going to grab that white on my number 4 brush. And so if you did my fall gnome, kind of the same thing. We want the strokes to kind of curve and contour in the shape of his beard. So I'm painting downwards, really kind of long flowy strokes, and then on the edge you want to kind of make sure that you get that texture edging on his beard, so you can stroke downwards. And then we got to go around his nose and around the hat, so you can kind of curve around the nose and then you can paint downwards some more. So you're just filling in that entire area with the white, and it already gives you that texture just because you're having your strokes kind of going downwards. So I'm taking the brush and I'm stroking down, kind of up and down, but I'm not going up, I'm going from the top bottom, so stroking downwards. And then, so before our white even dries, we're going to actually do some gray texturing in his beard. So on your palette, grab a little bit of black and mix it with your white so that you get sort of a medium gray color. And then kind of twist your brush to make sure that gray is right there, sort of on the tip of the brush. You get a close-up here of the beard. So I'm just kind of doing these sort of fast, sort of curved strokes in there with the gray, and that gray is going to create the texture of his beard. So we don't want to cover all the white. We're not making him go completely gray, but that gray is creating the texture lines, and nice and smooth. It's blending with that white because that white is not dry yet. So I have some areas that may be lighter, some areas that maybe show up a bit darker, and so you're just kind of flinging your brush, kind of adding pressure to it to create that kind of thick line. If you want to change the pressure to lighter, it would create a thinner line. And if you even want to add teeny tiny bit more black in there, if you wanted a few strokes of maybe some darker streaks in the beard, you can do that. So a few more strokes all over. Some of these are a lot smaller than the lighter gray ones, so you can kind of vary some of your strokes. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, and then you can kind of have it go out on the sides. So kind of have the line kind of wisp out on the sides if you wanted to create that texture on the sides. And if you accidentally paint over part of his hat or nose, that's okay. You can leave it that way, or you can always paint over it after it dries. So I'm done with the beard, and I'm going to move on to his red robe. So I really like this dark red that I created. This is a Cadmium Red Medium Hue, which is actually a really bright red. So I dimmed that red down by adding the green to it. So on my palette, I have the red, and I'm adding just a teeny bit of green in there. Again, you don't want to add too much green because then it would turn too brown, and we don't want it to be brown. We want it to be a very dark, sort of rich red color. I'm going to take that red, and that is what I'm going to use to paint his robe in. So just that shape. So we have it's super simple. You're just filling the shape in. I guess the direction of the strokes could kind of contour around his beard a little bit or around the edging, but you're pretty much just painting that shape in solid. I am still using my number 4 round brush, and always, if you are, this might be the number 8. Yes, this is the number 8 round brush. But I was going to say that it really doesn't matter if you feel more comfortable using a flat brush or a different brush. That's okay. You don't have to do this with the number 8. And so just filling that shape in, fill his sleeves in. I know this part is going a little bit fast, so if you're following along with me, I always tell you to press pause when you need to so that you can catch up. Don't paint that fast. It will just get really messy. And then I left the edging open. So he's going to have this white edging on his sleeve and on the bottom, kind of like the Santa Claus look. So I left that open, and I did not paint that red. Make sure that you have a nice solid coat over all that red. If you need to add a second coat later on, you can do that. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to paint the base of the ornament white so that it'll show up nice and bright red against that blue. The blue is really light, so you may not need to do the base white, but I did mine white just so that when I do the red, it's going to show up really bright in that area. So I'm painting the ornament white. I'm going to let that dry, and when it dries, I'm going to go back over it with just Cadmium Red Medium. And then with the white, go ahead and paint the ground. So we have the snow on the ground that the gnome is standing on. So that whole area under his shoes is going to be white. And then of course, if you're doing this on a stretched canvas, just touched up my circle right there, but if you're doing this on a stretched canvas, then you can have your colors go off on the side. I'm doing this on a panel so it doesn't have the sides of the canvas. So just fill that area in. I'm still using that number 8 round brush, but like I said earlier, if you feel like doing a different brush in that area, that is okay. So just make sure your line is a little bit wobbly because he's standing on snow and it's not a flat ground, it's a snowy ground. And then also I'm going to do the edging of his robe. So if that red is dry, if it's not dry, you can still do that and just be really careful. But I'm just painting the white edging on the bottom of his robe, and I'm also going to do it on his sleeves. Next, I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of shadow on the ground. So we want to make sure that this snow is still wet. So I'm applying a second coat of white on there just to be sure. This is just titanium white. And then I'm going to grab some gray on my palette. So you may need to freshen some black to make another gray. But with just that same gray I used in the beard, I'm going to apply that gray on the bottom of the snow area. And under his shoes, it's actually a darker gray under his shoes. So I did the sort of curved strokes going in a horizontal direction right under his shoes. And with the lighter gray, you just add it to the bottom and you blend it up to the white. So it is a very gentle gray. The top of the snow is super bright white and the bottom is just a really light gray. And that'll give you some pretty depth on your snow. So we're going to rinse our brush off and go ahead and go to the next step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second coat to the base part of my hat. Of course, I have to go ahead and make that color again, but I'm doing a second coat here because it doesn't really look like that on camera, but to me it didn't look like that first layer had enough coverage. I still was able to see some of the blue through that green. So that's what I did real quick is I just kind of mixed that color again, applied it to the base, and then I wanted it to make sure that it was overlapping my nose. And I kind of like how it created a little bit of color variation in there just because that color wasn't exactly the same green and it wasn't mixed all the way, so it kind of did that by accident. You can see how there's a little bit of a two-tone look in there because of the white. Kind of gave it a 3D effect by accident. Didn't do that on purpose, but I thought that was kind of cool the way that turned out. And then if you look at his beard on the right side, right under his hat, there's a little bit of a gap. Not too noticeable, but it was bothering me, so I just grabbed that white and I kind of extended his beard on the right here to make sure it was all under that hat over here, just on the right. So a little bit of white, and then I did just a few little touch-ups of the texture part kind of on the sides to make sure that it was overlapping that red, just in case if I had that red that overlapped the beard. So next I'm going to show you how to do the branches. And we're going to do the branches first, and we'll have to wait for that to dry before doing the little pine needles. But this is just Mars Black and a number 4 round brush. Slightly water down that black. So I dipped my brush in the water, but I didn't dry it. And I distributed that water into the Mars Black. And so there's Mars Black right there on the tip of my brush. Again, this is the number 4 round brush. And I'm just going to kind of draw a sort of uneven, jaggedy line. And this is the branches for the pine needles, and it's going to just kind of go off in a few different directions if I decide what I want to do there. So that one went off in 3 different directions. And then the one over here on the right, so both of them start at the corner and kind of dip down. And this one is going to kind of divide off and kind of go over my line a little bit. So that black has to dry before we can do the fun little pine needles. And then now that we have our black on our palette, we can go ahead and do the shoes, and we'll do the lantern as well. So with the shoes, I'm just painting that in solid black. Make sure that he's standing on the snow and not floating in the air, so make sure your black touches the snow area. And then if you wanted a little color variation in your black, I just added a teeny bit of white to my brush and kind of added the white right there on the top of his shoes to make his shoes look a little bit shiny. Next, I'm going to paint the lantern in. So this is still that number 4 round brush. I'm twisting it to make sure. I'm going to have paint right there on the tip because I really need that tip for this round brush because this lantern is kind of a small thing to paint. If you have a black paint pen, it would look good, but it would work fabulous here. And you wouldn't have to have like a really steady hand for this area, but basically, the shape of the lantern is going to be filled in. Just kind of pay attention to that handle. It's kind of overlapping his mitten a little bit, and then it goes down behind his mitten. And then everything else besides the little circle in the middle is painted black. So everything's black. There's that glass piece that's going to be left blank. I'll show you what I did. So we have that, those circles are painted black. And then the top piece is painted black. And then we have the sides of the actual glass part of the lamp outlined. And then these 2 sort of thicker lines on the left and the right. And the base is black. Okay, so for the light of the lantern, I grabbed some primary yellow and some white, and I'm literally going to use my finger. So I mixed white and yellow with my finger and stamped a yellow smudge right there on the light. And then I grabbed my brush and painted a white dot right in the middle. So that'll make it look like the light is on in his lantern. And then I went in and added a second coat of the Unbleached Titanium on his nose. And then if you wanted to do a little bit of highlighting now, you can. Or you could wait until later or just do the white without the second coat. But I just took a little bit of white and added that at the very top and just kind of blended it down a little bit. And then I went in and painted the ornaments red. So this is just the Cadmium Red Medium Hue, not mixed with anything. That white base is dry, so it will show up nice and bright. So then I'm going to rinse my brush off. I'm going to do that little hook that is attached to the ornament to make it look like it is hanging off of his hat. So how silly is that? So I just did the black and had it go around. and down, and then the little top piece, grab some white on my brush, mix it with the white to make it look gray. And this is still that number 4 round brush. And then I'm just going to go in and add that piece right there under the hook. So that shape up there, it's basically just a trapezoid shape. And I just went in there, kind of made it a little bit darker. Next, I'm going to show you a technique I did for the pine needles. So these angle brushes are your best friend when doing these pine needles. This is a 3/8 angle brush, but you can do this with a 1/4 inch angle brush or any kind of a small size. So I'm going to make that dark green color by mixing the green with the red and pretty dark. I'm going to add that paint right there on the tip of my brush right there. So this is the angle brush. I want to hold it so that top piece, the top tip part of it is facing up, and I'm painting down. So I'm starting from the branch and I'm stroking down to create the pine needle shape. So that's going kind of in slow motion to show you, but each of those pine needles, we're starting at the branch and we're stroking outwards, and then you want your needles to kind of angle downwards. And so that dark green color of all those pine needles, we're going to do that on all of those branches that we painted. So I'm just going to keep doing that. Just make sure that your top part of your angle is facing towards the top and you're stroking downwards. It creates that thin line, and it also helps your stroke go to a point. So I'm basically just going to keep doing this to all of these branch lines, and I work kind of fast here. You just want to make, when you do your stroke, I kind of stroke it fast, and I guess if you stroked it really slow it would make a thicker line, but you just want to keep making sure your angle's pointing up, starting at the base of the line, stroking downwards. It'll create the impression that it looks like a pine needle. And I'm going to do the same thing on the little branches that are over here on the right. Next, I'm going to do the second layer to these pine needles, and I'm going to make a lighter green. So I'm going to grab some white on my palette and mix it with that green. It's going to create a lighter green color. Apply it to the tip of my brush, and I'm going to go over these pine needles. So I'm not trying to cover the dark green. I'm just adding a second layer. And as soon as my hand moves out of the way, you can kind of see the effect that it's creating. So I'm just doing the same exact technique, only this adds another layer to it. And we can still see that dark green below it. Kind of gives it some dimension. So I'm just going over where I painted before, not trying to cover all the dark green, kind of making my own sort of, I guess I am going over it, but we can still see that dark green. So I'm not really going over every little tiny part of the line. So it just creates a second layer to that. So I'm going to do the same thing over on the right. So get my light green color on my palette. Make sure that green is right there on the tip of the bristles, and do your second layers. And I even did a third layer after this with just white. So this is 3 layers. So starting with the dark green and then going to the light green, and then rinsing your brush off and adding the white. So I'm going to rinse my brush off and of course pat it dry, and then apply just the titanium white to the tip of the brush so that that paint is right there on the tip of those bristles. And then I didn't go crazy with this white because the titanium white is such a strong color. It can easily overlap all these. So I just kind of accented it. Didn't do it as much. So just a few strokes here and there will create the impression that there's frost on the pine needles or maybe a little bit of snow. Alright, so with that number 4 round brush, I'm just going to go in here and paint a few fun little berries. So just the red and the little tiny circles. So these are kind of fun. It adds a little bit of pop of red up there in the area where there's a lot of green. And then it's also fun because when this red dries, we can add a little frost to the berries. And I forgot to mention that I used that Snow-Tex, so it's a Snow-Tex medium by DecoArt. I didn't use any of it yet, but towards the end of the painting, I added, it's a medium that's got like a texture on it, and it makes it look like snow, so it's actually texture. It kind of reminds me of sand. I'm not really sure what it's made of, but I feel like there's sand in it, but it makes it look like the snow's 3D. So I add that later on to the little berries. But right here, I'm just taking that red and adding a little bit to his robe just to give it some two-tone sort of color variation in there. Doesn't have to be necessary, but I thought it kind of gave more of a two-tone look to his robe. Next, I'm going to rinse that brush off, grab some titanium white, and I'm just going to do some details with this white. I'm going to do a highlight on the ornament. So with the number 4 round brush, paint right there on the tip, do the little highlight. Maybe there's a little bit highlight on the top. So it's all about these tiny little details. And then maybe little dots on the berries for frost, but later on I did do some more Snow-Tex on the frost. So then we can do the snowflakes. So this was really fun. There's a couple things you can do. You can do dots in the sky, or you can take your brush and you can paint out these snowflakes. So we all know that snowflakes are all different, no two are the same, so you can kind of apply that concept to your painting and do different sort of things. You can have dots on the ends of your lines. You can have sort of diagonal lines attached to them. It's kind of fun. You can look up clip art of snowflakes to look at different sort of designs of the snowflakes. You are kind of limited doing this with the little round brush, so if you want you can grab your spotter brush. So this is my 10-0 spotter brush. It kind of gives more control because these lines are more precise, so with this tiny brush you're able to do more detail work, but even then it requires more control. If you have a white paint pen, that would be perfect to do for this sort of painting. So grab one of those Posca paint pens and then you can draw your snowflakes in rather than use the paintbrush. But the paintbrush still gives it that kind of artistic paint effect look. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint all kinds of snowflakes all around the sky, including painting tiny little dots everywhere as well. So doing a mixture of circles or dots in the sky and the snowflakes gives it that sort of blistery, snowy effect. So I'm actually going to go silent here. This takes quite a bit of time to do, but it is super relaxing just to paint different kinds of snowflakes everywhere. So for this lantern, we're going to have this sort of glowing effect. And I took that spotter brush and the white and actually grabbed a little bit of yellow too. So sort of dry brush style. So that means there's not a lot of paint on the brush. I'm kind of wiping it off on my palette here, but I can also use the towel to wipe it off. So just create these streaks on the out part of the left and right of the lantern, and it creates this sort of glowing effect. You can add a little bit on the glass, but I wouldn't go too crazy, just to kind of keep it simple. And then you can take that and you can add a few little highlight lines on the lantern. So on the bottom part of the base, I did a line. And then I did a few little highlight lines on the top part of that circle and on the right part of the lantern. And then I'm just taking that black, and remember that X sort of thing that we drew earlier? I'm taking that and I'm going over that light piece. And so another little detail I did was grab that dark green again, so that hooker's green, and take one of my round brush. This is my 4 round brush. And so I'm just adding a shadowy area on the ornament. So just on the left part, kind of a reflection from his hat. So I'm just taking that and I'm doing sort of a zigzag line thing just on the left edge of the ornament. And then I took that green and I added a second coat to his mittens real quick. Next is the fun part. So I did the white designs on his hat and I absolutely love how this turned out. It makes his hat look like a sweater pattern and it just really brings out the style in the hat. I don't know what it is, but I love these little designs. You don't have to do it if you don't like it, but this is what I did with the number 4 round brush and the white, and I just added patterns on his hat. So you want to make sure when you do the patterns that, especially for these lines, these stripe lines, they kind of go in the direction of the hat. If you think about it, the hat kind of has curves, so it's not exactly straight all the way across. And so I just kind of started at the bottom and did a thick line and with X's, and then I did another line and then maybe dots or maybe a couple lines together. So super fun, and it creates the look that he's got the sweater pattern, the winter classic sweater pattern on his hat. I think it looks absolutely adorable and super fun, and that's what I did. As you work your way up, just make sure that your lines still kind of curve and contour with the hat direction. And my patterns actually get smaller as they go up because my hat is going more towards a tip. And so it's a smaller area to work in. And if you need to, you can switch to your spotter brush as you get more up there in these smaller areas. I didn't really do designs on the tip of the hat. I just kind of left it and just kind of went really kind of abstract up there. Had it, the designs just kind of faded away on their own. And then of course when the hat curves, your lines are going to have to curve too. So I didn't do patterns on the tip. I just left that blank. Thought it would be maybe too busy if I did patterns all the way. And then continuing with my white, I did highlights. I get super highlight happy sometimes. So on the top of his nose and on the right part of his robe and on the right part of his mitten and maybe on his shoe, just gives him a little bit of extra character. Oh, and I did the little white part on his hat as well, touching up his hat over here. Last but not least, I'm going to demonstrate this Snow-Tex that I was talking about earlier. You probably had no idea what I was talking about. So this is the Snow-Tex by DecoArt, and it's a medium for crafts. It can be used on canvas paintings too. So if you have a snowy scene in your painting, like for example, we have snow on the ground, you can take it and you can apply it. And this was actually my first time experimenting with it. The brush, it didn't really take to the brush very well, it just kind of pushed it around. But I ended up finding that, so this is a 3/4 wash brush, but I ended up finding that the palette knife worked better for this. So it's kind of because of the nature of the texture, the brush didn't take to it very well. But it works nicely when your base color is already white, because then adding it on top of it gives it that added texture. Got a little snow on his robe, but that's okay. And then you can even use your finger to kind of apply it. So it's not really an easy medium to manipulate, but let me show you here with the palette knife. The palette knife kind of let it go on a little bit easier. So you just grab it and like you're frosting a cake. So you just take it and apply it. So when it dries pretty solid. It flakes off a little bit, but I mean, that's just the nature of the medium, but it does dry pretty solid. And but the texture of it gives it this really cool dimension, 3D effect, and it really does look like snow. So this is completely optional. I love trying new products. I like experimenting with new things, especially when you're kind of working with the same materials all the time. You kind of want to venture off and try new things. So that's what I've been doing lately, trying different things. And then, so yeah, it's workable with your fingers. You can also, or I also applied it to some of the berries up in the sky, up in the branches. And I'll kind of tilt this for you to see on camera. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but it does look really cool. And it does look really cool when it's dried, because it really gives it that snow sort of texture. So that's a fun medium you could use for your winter paintings, especially if you'll be doing a lot of paintings with snow, which I can imagine is going to be the majority of paintings in the next few weeks that I'll be doing. So I am finished with this winter gnome painting. I'm going to go ahead and sign my name. This is the spotter brush. And over here on the right side, I'm just going to go ahead and sign my name and call it finished. So this is the conclusion of how to paint a winter gnome painting tutorial. If you have not painted my fall gnome yet, there's still time to do that. I'll most likely be doing a spring one and a summer one when those seasons come around. But this is the conclusion of how to paint a winter gnome painting tutorial. Thank you for watching.